For 5 years, I thought I had the perfect friend group. We did everything together, and I felt so lucky to be part of their successful, rich lives. Then I decided to surprise my friend Emma at her marketing firm for her birthday, but the receptionist had never even heard of her. That's when I discovered that none of my friends were who they claimed to be. I spent 5 years thinking I had found my chosen family, but I was actually the only real person in a group of complete strangers pretending to be my friends. My name is Rachel, and I'm 28 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been part of what I thought was the most amazing friend group anyone could ask for. There were 6 of us total: me, Emma, Jake, Sophia, Marcus, and Lily. We met through a young professionals networking group when I first moved to the city after college, and we clicked immediately. We did everything together: weekend trips, dinner parties, holiday celebrations, birthday parties. They felt like the family I'd chosen for myself. Each of my friends had such interesting, successful lives that honestly made me feel a little insecure sometimes. Emma worked as a marketing executive at a prestigious firm called Thompson Marketing Group and was always jetting off to conferences in exciting cities. She'd come back with stories about meeting industry leaders and closing major deals. She had this corner office with a view of the harbor and a company credit card that she used for client dinners at expensive restaurants. Emma would casually mention her 6-figure salary and talk about the stock options she was receiving as part of her compensation package. Jake was a freelance photographer who did shoots for major magazines and had this amazing downtown loft studio. His Instagram was filled with behind-the-scenes shots from fashion shoots and celebrity portraits. He'd casually mention working with famous models and having his work featured in national publications like Vogue and GQ. His studio was incredible: exposed brick walls, professional lighting equipment everywhere, and framed prints of his supposedly published work covering the walls. He drove a vintage Mercedes that he claimed he'd bought with earnings from a particularly lucrative magazine contract. Sophia worked in finance and seemed to make incredible money, always wearing designer clothes and talking about her investment portfolio. She'd discuss stock picks and market trends like she was some kind of Wall Street insider. Her apartment was filled with expensive art and furniture, and she drove a BMW that she claimed was just her weekend car. She was always planning exotic vacations to places like Japan and Switzerland, posting photos from first-class flights and luxury hotels. Sophia would mention her bonus checks and talk about considering early retirement because her investments were doing so well. Marcus was a software developer at a tech startup called Innovate Tech that was supposedly about to go public, and he was always talking about stock options and IPO timelines. He'd show us prototypes of the app his company was developing and explain complex technical concepts about artificial intelligence and machine learning. His apartment was like something out of a tech magazine, with multiple computer monitors, smart home devices, and gadgets I'd never seen before. He drove a Tesla and was always talking about the latest tech conferences he was attending or speaking at. Lily worked as an event coordinator for high-end weddings and corporate parties, and she seemed to know everyone in the city's social scene. She'd tell us stories about coordinating events for celebrities and politicians, name-dropping famous clients and exclusive venues. Her apartment was elegantly decorated and always looked like it was ready for a photo shoot. She drove a Range Rover and wore designer clothes that she claimed were gifts from grateful clients. Lily was always getting invited to exclusive parties and gallery openings, and she'd share photos from red carpet events and charity galas. Meanwhile, I was working as a junior accountant at a small firm called Peterson & Associates, living in a basic one-bedroom apartment, and constantly feeling like I was behind in life compared to my successful friends. I made $45,000 a year, which was decent for someone just starting their career, but nothing compared to what they all seemed to be earning. I drove a used Honda Civic and shopped at Target while they were wearing designer clothes and eating at restaurants I couldn't afford, but they never made me feel bad about it. They were always supportive and encouraging, telling me that success comes at different times for everyone and that I shouldn't compare myself to others. Emma would say things like, "Money isn't everything, Rachel. You're building a solid foundation for your career." Jake would insist that my steady job was actually smarter than his unpredictable freelance income. Sophia would offer to help me with investment advice when I was ready to start building wealth. Marcus would talk about how accounting was actually more stable than tech, and Lily would say that my practical nature was refreshing compared to the drama in her industry. We had this tradition of monthly dinner parties where we'd rotate hosting at each other's places. Emma's apartment was this gorgeous high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture. The kitchen had professional-grade appliances and a wine fridge stocked with bottles that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When she cooked for us, she'd prepare these elaborate meals with ingredients I'd never heard of, like truffle oil and imported cheeses. Her dining room table was solid hardwood and could seat 8 people comfortably. The living room had a massive flat-screen TV and surround sound system that made movie nights feel like being in a theater. Jake's loft was like something out of a magazine, with exposed brick walls and professional photography equipment everywhere. He'd show us his latest projects and explain the technical aspects of different shots. The space felt like a real working studio, with props and backdrops stored in organized corners. He even had a dark room where he claimed to develop film for special projects. His furniture was a mix of vintage and modern pieces that looked expensive and carefully curated. The kitchen was small but had high-end appliances, and he had a collection of vintage cameras displayed on floating shelves. Sophia's place was minimalist and modern with art that probably cost more than my car. Everything was perfectly curated and expensive looking, from the marble countertops to the hardwood floors. She had this walk-in closet that was bigger than my bedroom, filled with designer shoes and handbags organized by color. Her bathroom looked like a spa, with high-end skincare products and luxury towels. The living room had a white leather sofa and a glass coffee table with art books and magazines perfectly arranged. Her bedroom had a king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and a view of the city skyline. Marcus's apartment was a tech enthusiast's dream, with smart everything and gadgets that seemed straight out of the future. He'd demonstrate voice-controlled lighting and show us beta versions of apps before they were released to the public. His home office had multiple screens and equipment that looked incredibly expensive and professional. The living room had a massive gaming setup with the latest consoles and a VR system. His kitchen had smart appliances that he could control from his phone, and he had multiple computers set up throughout the apartment for different projects. Lily's place felt like a boutique hotel, with fresh flowers everywhere and furniture that looked like it came from high-end design magazines. She had a dedicated office space where she kept portfolios of her event planning work, filled with photos of beautiful weddings and corporate events. Everything was perfectly organized and aesthetically pleasing. Her guest bathroom had fancy hand soaps and monogrammed towels. The living room had antique furniture mixed with modern pieces, and she had a collection of coffee table books about interior design and entertaining. Even when I hosted at my modest apartment, they were always gracious and complimentary. They'd bring expensive wine and flowers, and they'd insist that my simple home-cooked meals were delicious. They made me feel like my contribution to the group was valued, even though I couldn't match their lifestyle or entertaining standards. Emma would compliment my cozy decorating style. Jake would take artistic photos of my humble dinner setup. Sophia would bring dessert from an expensive bakery. Marcus would help me set up my basic sound system for background music. And Lily would arrange the flowers I couldn't afford in a way that made them look professional. Our friendship rituals extended beyond just dinner parties. We had annual traditions like New Year's Eve celebrations at expensive hotels, group vacations to destinations I could barely afford, and birthday celebrations at upscale restaurants. Emma would organize weekend trips to her family's supposed vacation home in the Hamptons. Jake would arrange photography workshops where he'd teach us about lighting and composition. Sophia would plan investment club meetings where she'd share market insights and portfolio strategies. Marcus would host game nights with the latest tech gadgets and virtual reality experiences. Lily would get us invitations to exclusive events and parties through her supposed industry connections. The first crack in the facade appeared about 3 months ago during one of our dinner parties at Marcus's place. We were all sitting around his dining table, and Marcus was telling us about his startup's latest funding round. He was going into detail about venture capitalists and market valuations, using terms that sounded impressive but also felt rehearsed somehow. He talked about Series A funding and convertible notes and equity percentages, discussing how their artificial intelligence platform was revolutionizing customer service for enterprise clients. I work with numbers all day, so I started asking more specific questions about the company's financial projections and business model. I wanted to understand how they were planning to monetize their user base and what their customer acquisition costs looked like. These seemed like reasonable questions for someone working in the tech industry to be able to answer. I asked about their burn rate, their runway, and their path to profitability. Marcus seemed to stumble over his answers, giving vague responses and quickly changing the subject. He said things like, "Well, that's really more of a question for our CFO, and the specifics are confidential, but I can tell you we're very optimistic." When I pressed for more details about the technology stack or the competitive landscape, he became increasingly uncomfortable. At the time, I just figured he was being cautious about sharing proprietary information, which made sense. But something about his body language seemed off, like he was uncomfortable discussing details about his own job. A few weeks later, I was walking through downtown during my lunch break when I thought I saw Jake coming out of a Starbucks. I called out his name and started walking toward him, excited to say hello. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't Jake at all, just someone who looked similar from a distance. The weird part was that this guy was wearing the exact same jacket that Jake had worn to dinner the previous weekend, and he was carrying a camera bag identical to Jake's. It made me wonder if Jake had somehow lost his jacket and camera bag, or if there was some other explanation for the coincidence. I started paying more attention to little inconsistencies after that. Sophia would post Instagram photos from expensive restaurants and vacation destinations, but when I asked her about them later, her descriptions of the experiences seemed vague and secondhand. She'd say things like, "Oh, the food was amazing," but couldn't remember specific dishes or details about the service. Her vacation photos were gorgeous, but when I asked about recommendations for hotels or restaurants, she couldn't provide useful information. When I mentioned wanting to try a restaurant she'd supposedly been to, she'd make excuses about why we shouldn't go there or say it had closed down. Emma would talk about her business trips, but when I mentioned wanting to visit some of the cities she'd supposedly been to, she couldn't give me any specific recommendations for restaurants or attractions. She'd make general statements like, "Chicago is great," but couldn't tell me about neighborhoods to visit or specific experiences she'd had there. For someone who traveled for work constantly, she seemed remarkably unfamiliar with the places she claimed to visit regularly. When I asked about her hotel preferences or airline status, she'd give generic answers that didn't match someone who traveled frequently for business. I also started noticing that our friend group was surprisingly isolated from their supposed coworkers and professional contacts. In 5 years of friendship, I'd never met anyone from Emma's marketing firm, despite her claims that she worked closely with a large team. Jake never introduced us to other photographers or models he claimed to work with. Sophia never brought colleagues to any of our gatherings, even though she supposedly worked at a large financial firm with lots of young professionals. Marcus never mentioned specific coworkers by name, and when he did reference his team, the details were always vague and generic. Lily never invited us to any of the events she supposedly coordinated, claiming they were too exclusive or that she couldn't get additional tickets. The breaking point came 2 months ago when I decided to surprise Emma at her office for her birthday. I'd bought her favorite lunch from this expensive sushi place nearby, and thought it would be a nice gesture to show up at her marketing firm with food and flowers. I'd never been to her office before, but she'd mentioned the company name countless times, and I'd looked up the address online. Thompson Marketing Group was supposedly one of the most prestigious firms in the city, with offices in a gleaming high-rise downtown. The building was impressive, a modern high-rise in the financial district with a marble lobby and security desk. I told the security guard I was there to visit Emma Collins at Thompson Marketing Group on the 15th floor. He checked his directory and directed me to the elevator, so I assumed everything was normal. The elevator was crowded with professionals in expensive suits, and I felt underdressed in my simple work clothes. When I arrived at the 15th floor and approached the reception desk, I asked for Emma Collins in marketing. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, looked confused and said there was no one by that name working there. I assumed maybe Emma went by her middle name or had gotten married and changed her last name without telling us. I described her physical appearance in detail and asked if anyone matching that description worked in the marketing department. The receptionist was very patient and helpful, but after checking with several people and looking through employee directories, she confirmed that no one matching Emma's description worked anywhere in the building. She even called the HR department to double-check, thinking maybe Emma was a new hire who hadn't been added to the directory yet. But there was no record of anyone named Emma Collins ever working for Thompson Marketing Group. I was completely bewildered. I'd been to Emma's apartment dozens of times. I'd heard her take work calls where she discussed specific campaigns and client meetings. She'd complained about particular coworkers and projects. She'd shown us company-branded merchandise and business cards with the Thompson Thompson Marketing Group logo. How could she not work where she said she worked? I decided not to confront Emma directly about it at first. Instead, I started doing some detective work to see if I could figure out what was going on. I began paying closer attention to everyone's stories and looking for ways to verify the information they shared with the group. I started keeping notes about the details they mentioned and looking for inconsistencies or claims I could fact-check. The more I investigated, the more disturbing things became. I discovered that Jake's photography studio was actually just a regular apartment that he decorated to look professional. I found this out when I was walking past the building one evening and saw him in the window. The space looked completely different without all the photography equipment set up. It was just a normal living room with regular furniture and no sign of the professional setup I'd seen during our visits. I decided to test this discovery by walking past the building at different times to see if I could observe more. What I found was that the apartment would transform dramatically depending on when I looked. Sometimes it looked like a normal living space with a couch and TV. Other times it was set up like a photography studio with lights and backdrops. It became clear that Jake was staging the space for our visits and then returning it to its normal configuration afterward. I started reverse searching some of the photos that Sophia posted on social media from her supposed designer shopping trips and expensive dinners. Many of them were stock photos or images stolen from other people's accounts. When I confronted the evidence, I realized that Sophia had been creating a fake lifestyle online using other people's photos and experiences. Her vacation photos were actually professional travel photography she'd downloaded from tourism websites. Her restaurant photos were lifted from food bloggers and restaurant marketing materials. I spent hours going through her social media history, and the pattern became clear. Almost nothing she'd posted over the past 5 years was actually from her own experiences. She'd been curating a completely fictional online presence using content stolen from dozens of different sources. The few photos that were actually of her were taken in generic locations that could be anywhere, carefully cropped to hide any identifying details about where she really was. Marcus's startup story began falling apart when I looked up the company he claimed to work for. Innovate Tech existed as a real company, but when I checked their employee directory and LinkedIn pages, there was no record of Marcus ever working there. I even called the company's main number and asked to be transferred to Marcus's extension. The receptionist had never heard of him, and when I described him, no one at the company could identify who I was talking about. I dug deeper into the company's website and found detailed information about their actual employees and leadership team. Marcus wasn't mentioned anywhere, and his supposed area of expertise, artificial intelligence for customer service, wasn't even something the company worked on. Their actual business model was completely different from what Marcus had described to us. Lily's event planning business seemed legitimate at first, but when I tried to find her company online or look at reviews from past clients, I couldn't find any evidence that her business actually existed. The website she'd shown us before was beautifully designed but had no real contact information or client testimonials that I could verify. When I searched for the business license, nothing came up in the city records. I tried calling the venues where Lily claimed to have coordinated events, pretending to be a potential client looking for references. None of them had ever heard of Lily or her supposed company. The exclusive events she claimed to attend were either completely fictional or real events that she'd researched online and pretended to have been involved with. The most shocking discovery came when I decided to drive past Emma's apartment building one Saturday morning. I'd been there so many times for our dinner parties, but I wanted to see if maybe I could catch her coming or going and figure out what was really going on with her job situation. What I saw made my blood run cold. Emma was leaving the building in what appeared to be a cleaning lady's uniform, carrying supplies and loading them into a beat-up Honda that I'd never seen before. This was the same Emma who supposedly made 6 figures in marketing and drove a BMW that she claimed was a company car. She was wearing a uniform with a cleaning company logo and looked nothing like the polished executive I thought I knew. I followed her at a distance and watched as she drove to an office building across town. She spent the next 4 hours cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, and vacuuming floors. Emma, who I thought was a successful marketing executive attending high-level meetings and managing major accounts, was actually working as a night janitor. I watched her through the windows as she cleaned the same type of corporate offices where she claimed to work as an executive. I sat in my car watching her work and felt like my entire reality was crumbling. If Emma's life was a complete lie, what about everyone else? How many of my friends were living fake lives, and why were they doing it? The person I'd looked up to as the most successful member of our group was actually working one of the most humble jobs imaginable. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with uncovering the truth about each member of our friend group. I started following them discreetly, checking their social media more carefully, and trying to verify every claim they made about their lives. I felt like a private investigator, but I needed to know the extent of the deception I'd been living with for 5 years. What I discovered was beyond anything I could have imagined. Jake wasn't a photographer at all. He worked at a retail electronics store in a shopping mall and lived in a studio apartment that he'd been staging to look like a professional photography studio whenever we visited. The expensive camera equipment was rented for special occasions and returned afterward. I watched him one evening as he packed up all the professional lighting and camera gear, loading it into a rental van to return to an equipment rental company. I followed Jake to his real job and watched him working behind the counter at an electronics store, wearing a polo shirt with the company logo and helping customers with phone repairs and accessory purchases. It was such a stark contrast to the sophisticated artist persona he'd maintained with our group. The published photographs covering his walls weren't his work at all. They were prints he'd ordered online of famous photographers' work. The magazines he claimed to be featured in either didn't exist or were publications he'd created fake covers for using photo editing software. Sophia didn't work in finance or have any money. She was actually a waitress at a chain restaurant and lived with 3 roommates in a tiny apartment across town. The designer clothes she wore to our gatherings were either knockoffs purchased online or items she'd bought from expensive stores and returned after wearing them once, taking advantage of generous return policies. Her Instagram posts about expensive experiences were all fabricated using other people's photos. I followed her one evening and watched her serve tables at an Applebee's, wearing the standard uniform and clearly struggling to handle a busy shift. She was friendly with customers but looked exhausted and stressed in a way I'd never seen before. The BMW she supposedly drove belonged to one of her roommates, and she only borrowed it for special occasions when when she needed to maintain her wealthy persona. Her actual transportation was a beat-up Honda Civic that was probably older than mine. Marcus didn't work at a tech startup or have any involvement in the technology industry. He was unemployed and had been living off savings and credit cards while pretending to have this high-powered job. The apartment where we'd had dinner parties wasn't even his. It belonged to a friend who let him borrow it for special occasions in exchange for help with household projects and errands. His real living situation was a tiny studio apartment filled with secondhand furniture and no sign of the expensive tech equipment I'd seen at the other place. The gadgets and computers he'd shown us were either borrowed from friends or purchased and quickly returned to stores within the return window. He'd been accumulating massive credit card debt to maintain his fake lifestyle, and I later learned he was facing eviction from his studio apartment. Lily's event planning career was entirely fictional. She worked part-time at a grocery store stocking shelves and lived in a basement apartment with a roommate. When she hosted our group, she would rent a nice Airbnb for the evening and pretend it was her place. The portfolio of events she'd planned was actually photos stolen from real event planners' websites and social media accounts. She'd spent hours researching the event planning industry so she could speak knowledgeably about it, but she'd never actually coordinated a single real event. The Range Rover she supposedly drove was actually a rental that she would get for special occasions, carefully timing the rental periods around our group gatherings and social media posts. Her designer clothes came from consignment shops and discount retailers, mixed with strategic purchases that she would return after wearing once. The coordination required to maintain these lies was staggering. They had created fake social media accounts, staged photos, borrowed or rented locations, and somehow managed to keep their stories straight across years of friendship. They'd even created fake work schedules that aligned with each other so their lies wouldn't conflict when we made plans or discussed our weeks. But the most disturbing part was that they'd all been lying together. This wasn't a case of individual people embellishing their lives. It was a coordinated effort where all 5 of my friends had agreed to create fake personas and maintain an elaborate deception. They'd formed their own support network for maintaining their lies, helping each other with props, alibis, and story coordination. I discovered they had a private group chat called The Performance, where they coordinated their lies and warned each other about potential exposure. They would share tips on where to rent expensive clothes, how to fake social media posts convincingly, and strategies for deflecting questions about their supposed careers. They'd even practiced their fake stories together to make sure their details were consistent and their timelines aligned. In this group chat, they'd assigned each other roles and specialties. Emma was the research coordinator, responsible for finding realistic details about marketing industry trends and company structures. Jake handled the visual assets, creating fake portfolios and finding convincing photos for their social media accounts. Sophia managed financial credibility, researching investment terminology and market trends to sound knowledgeable about finance. Marcus was the tech consultant, staying up to date on startup culture and technology trends to maintain his persona. Lily coordinated social proof, finding real events and social situations they could reference to make their lives seem more connected and exciting. I finally confronted Emma first since her lie was the one I'd discovered most thoroughly. I told her I knew she didn't work in marketing and that I'd seen her cleaning offices. Her reaction was not what I expected. Instead of denial or shame, she seemed almost relieved that someone had figured it out. Emma broke down crying and admitted that the entire friend group had been living a lie since the day we met. She explained that when they joined the Young Professionals networking group, they'd all felt insecure about their real jobs and life situations. They'd started by embellishing small details about their careers, but the lies had snowballed into these elaborate fake identities. According to Emma, the group had made a pact to maintain their fictional lives because they enjoyed the respect and admiration they received from others, including me. They'd created a feedback loop where each person's fake success motivated the others to make their own lies more elaborate and convincing. What had started as minor exaggerations had evolved into completely fabricated identities. Emma told me that they'd actually become close friends through the process of maintaining their deception. They would help each other stage photos, borrow clothes and accessories, and coordinate their fake schedules. The monthly dinner parties at expensive apartments were their biggest production, requiring significant planning and expense to pull off convincingly. They would pool their resources to rent locations, buy props, and create the elaborate sets that convinced me they all lived luxurious lives. What hurt the most was learning that I had been specifically targeted as someone who would be impressed by their fake lives and wouldn't ask too many probing questions. They'd seen me as naive and gullible, someone who would make them feel successful by comparison, while also providing them with a sense of having fooled someone completely. Emma admitted that they'd discussed my personality and background extensively before deciding to include me in their deception. Emma showed me screenshots of their group chat where they discussed strategies for maintaining their lies around me specifically. They'd called me the Mark, and had made jokes about how easily impressed I was by their fake accomplishments. They'd even placed bets on how long they could maintain the deception before I caught on, with Marcus winning the pool by predicting I'd never figure it out on my own. The group chat messages were devastating to read. They'd analyze my insecurities and use them against me, making me feel inferior to their supposed success, while secretly mocking my authentic life. They'd laughed about my modest apartment, my practical car, and my genuine job, treating my real life as entertainment for their private conversations. When I confronted the rest of the group, their reactions varied dramatically and revealed different aspects of their personalities that I'd never seen before. Jake seemed genuinely remorseful and admitted that the deception had gotten out of hand. He said they'd started the lies as a way to feel better about themselves, but had gotten trapped in maintaining them. He claimed he'd wanted to come clean multiple times but was afraid of losing the friendship and the acceptance he felt from the group. Jake broke down during our conversation and admitted that the pressure of maintaining his fake photographer persona had been overwhelming. He'd spent countless hours learning photography terminology and studying famous photographers' work, so he could speak convincingly about the industry. He'd maxed out multiple credit cards renting equipment and staging his apartment for our visits. He showed me his real photography work, amateur shots he'd taken as a hobby, and explained that he'd been too ashamed of his actual skill level to share it with the group. Sophia was defensive and argued that everyone embellishes their lives on social media anyway, so what they were doing wasn't that different. She said that I was being hypocritical because I'd also presented my best self to the group and hadn't shared all my struggles and insecurities. She seemed genuinely angry that I'd spied on them and violated their privacy by following them and investigating their claims. During our confrontation, Sophia revealed that she'd been inspired by influencers and celebrities who curate perfect online personas, arguing that the line between authentic self-presentation and fiction was blurrier than I was making it seem. She claimed that everyone lies about their lives to some extent, whether through selective social media posting or exaggerating stories in casual conversation. She couldn't understand why I was treating their coordinated deception as fundamentally different from normal social behavior. Marcus tried to minimize the situation by saying that the fake details didn't matter because our friendship was real. He claimed that they genuinely cared about me and that the lies were just about career stuff, not about their feelings toward me. He insisted that the emotional connections we'd shared were authentic, even if the context had been fabricated. Marcus became philosophical during our conversation, arguing that identity itself is a social construction and that their fake personas were just as valid as their real selves. He claimed that the confident, successful versions of themselves they'd created through their lies were aspirational identities that represented who they wanted to become. He seemed to genuinely believe that the deception had been a form of positive visualization that would eventually become reality. Lily was the most upset about being caught, and actually seemed angry at me for investigating their lives instead of just accepting what they told me. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling, saying that I'd violated their trust by following them and checking up on their stories. She seemed to genuinely believe that I was the one who had done something wrong by uncovering their deception. Lily's reaction was the most disturbing because she showed no remorse for the lies themselves, only anger at being discovered. She argued that I had no right to stalk them or investigate their private lives, completely missing the point that they'd been lying to me for 5 years. She seemed to view our friendship as a performance where everyone was supposed to play their assigned roles without asking too many questions. The confrontation revealed just how deep their deception went, beyond what I'd already discovered. They'd been group texting about me behind my back for years, sharing strategies for maintaining their lies, and warning each other when I seemed suspicious about something. They'd created detailed backstories for their fake careers, and had practiced answering questions about their supposed jobs. They'd also been making fun of me in their private conversations, joking about how easily I believed their stories and how impressed I was by their fake accomplishments. Reading some of the text messages that Emma showed me was devastating. These people I'd considered my closest friends had been viewing me as entertainment and a confidence boost, rather than a genuine relationship. The messages revealed that they'd been analyzing my reactions to their stories, adjusting their lies based on what seemed to impress me most. They'd noticed that I was particularly interested in career success and financial stability, so they'd focused their fabrications on those areas. They'd crafted their fake personas specifically to appeal to my values and insecurities. The financial cost of maintaining their deception had been enormous, and was one of the factors that eventually made their situation unsustainable. Between renting apartments for dinner parties, buying or renting expensive clothes and accessories, and funding their fake social media lifestyles, each of them had gone into significant debt. They'd been essentially performing wealth and success that they couldn't afford, all to maintain their image within the friend group. Emma had maxed out 3 credit cards and taken out a personal loan to fund her fake lifestyle. She'd been working extra shifts at her cleaning job to make minimum payments on her debt, while also saving money for the expensive props needed to maintain her marketing executive persona. She'd calculated that she'd spent over $30,000 over 5 years on maintaining her fake identity. Jake had spent his entire savings on camera equipment rentals and expensive clothes. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck while renting professional photography gear for our gatherings and social media posts. He'd also invested money in creating fake business cards, websites, and portfolios to support his photographer persona. The financial stress had been affecting his mental health and his performance at his real job. Sophia was living paycheck to paycheck while spending hundreds of dollars on outfit rentals and fake designer accessories. She'd been using credit cards to fund her fake restaurant experiences and vacation posts, carefully timing her purchases to avoid immediate financial consequences. She'd even created fake bank statements and investment account screenshots to share with the group when discussing her supposed financial success. Marcus had accumulated over $30,000 in credit card debt and was facing potential bankruptcy. He'd been using cash advances to pay rent on his studio apartment while also funding the props needed for his tech entrepreneur persona. The friend who let him borrow the nice apartment for our gatherings had been charging him a fee for each use, adding to his financial burden. Lily had been working extra shifts at the grocery store to fund her event planner persona, but even with the additional income, she couldn't keep up with the costs. She'd been maxing out credit cards to pay for Airbnb rentals, designer outfit purchases, and car rentals. She'd also been borrowing money from family members under false pretenses, claiming she needed funds for her supposed business. What made the situation even more twisted was that they'd all been struggling with the same insecurities about their real lives, but instead of supporting each other authentically, they'd created this competitive environment where everyone felt pressure to maintain increasingly elaborate lies. They were all working service jobs or entry-level positions, while pretending to have these glamorous careers, creating a support group based on mutual deception rather than mutual understanding. The psychological toll of maintaining such extensive lies had also been significant for all of them. Emma admitted that she'd been having anxiety attacks about being discovered and had started avoiding certain social situations where her fake story might be challenged. She'd been living in constant fear that someone from Thompson Marketing Group would see her social media posts and expose her lies. Jake said he'd lost track of which version of himself was real, and which was the performance he put on for others. He'd been struggling with identity issues and depression, related to the gap between his authentic self and his fake persona. He'd started believing some of his own lies and had become confused about his actual skills and accomplishments. Sophia had developed an eating disorder related to the pressure of maintaining her wealthy, successful image. She'd been skipping meals to save money for her fake lifestyle, while also trying to maintain the appearance of someone who could afford expensive restaurants and luxury experiences. The stress of coordinating her lies had been affecting her sleep and her performance at her real job. Marcus had been experiencing panic attacks related to his financial situation and the fear of being discovered. He'd been unable to sleep because of anxiety about his mounting debt and the unsustainability of his fake lifestyle. He'd started avoiding family and old friends because he couldn't maintain his lies across multiple social circles. Lily had been dealing with severe depression and isolation despite being surrounded by our friend group. She'd felt disconnected from her authentic self and had started to believe that no one would like her real personality or life situation. The effort required to maintain her fake persona had been exhausting and had left her feeling empty and disconnected. During our group confrontation, I learned about additional lies they'd told that I hadn't even discovered during my investigation. Marcus admitted that the startup he claimed to work for was actually a company he'd applied to, but never heard back from. He'd created an elaborate fantasy about working there and had even forged fake pay stubs and employment verification letters in case anyone ever asked for proof of his employment. Sophia revealed that her investment portfolio was entirely fictional and that she'd been using investment apps demo modes to create fake screenshots of supposed gains. She'd even created fake bank statements showing large balances that didn't exist, using photo editing software to alter real statements from her nearly empty checking account. Lily confessed that the exclusive events she claimed to attend were actually parties she'd seen on social media and researched extensively so she could describe them as if she'd been there. She'd never planned a single real event and had no connections in the industry she claimed to work in. Her supposed client testimonials were fictional reviews she'd written herself. Jake admitted that his photography equipment wasn't just rented for special occasions. He'd actually been involved in a complex equipment sharing scheme with several other people who were also faking their careers. They'd coordinate rentals and trade equipment to create the illusion that they all owned expensive gear. Emma revealed that her supposed business trips were actually day trips where she'd drive to nearby cities, take photos at airports and hotels, and then return home the same day. She'd researched restaurants and attractions online so she could speak knowledgeably about places she'd never actually visited. The group had also created fake references for each other, pretending to be former colleagues or clients when potential employers called to verify their supposed work experience. They'd developed an elaborate system of covering for each other's lies that extended far beyond just their friendship. Emma had pretended to be Jake's former client when he applied for photography jobs, while Jake had posed as Emma's colleague when she tried to get interviews at real marketing firms. They'd even created fake LinkedIn profiles and professional websites to support each other's fabricated careers. Marcus had built websites for Jake's photography business and Lily's event planning company, while Sophia had created fake professional profiles that they could reference as business contacts. The level of coordination required to maintain this network of deception was staggering. The most disturbing revelation was that they'd been recruiting other people into their deception, without those people knowing they were part of a coordinated lie. They'd convinced acquaintances to pose as clients, colleagues, or industry contacts in photos and social media posts, telling these people they were helping with professional portfolio development or networking content creation. Emma had paid her cousin to pose as a co-worker in several LinkedIn photos, telling her cousin she needed professional headshots for a company website. Jake had convinced friends from his electronics store job to dress up and pose as models for his fake photography portfolio, claiming he was building a legitimate business and needed practice shots. Sophia had involved her roommates in creating fake social media content, having them take photos of her in borrowed luxury items and expensive locations. She'd convinced them she was building an influencer brand and needed content for potential sponsorship deals. Marcus had used photos from his friend's actual tech job to create fake workplace content, telling his friend he was documenting startup culture for a blog he was writing. Lily had been the most manipulative in involving outsiders, actually convincing several people to let her photograph their real events and then claiming credit for planning them. She'd approached photographers at weddings and corporate events, offering to help with equipment or assist with setup in exchange for being included in some photos that she could later use as portfolio pieces. The aftermath of discovering the truth was emotionally devastating for me in ways I'm still processing months later. I had to reevaluate every memory I had with these people, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. Every conversation, every piece of advice they'd given me, every moment of support during difficult times, all of it was tainted by the knowledge that they'd been living completely false lives. I started questioning my own judgment and perception of reality. If I could be fooled so completely by people I saw regularly and considered my closest friends, how could I trust my instincts about anyone else? I began second-guessing every interaction I'd had with them, looking for signs I should have noticed or red flags I'd missed. The betrayal felt different from typical friendship conflicts because it wasn't just about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. It was about the fundamental nature of reality and truth. These people had created an alternate universe where I was the only one living authentically, while everyone else was essentially actors playing roles designed to manipulate my emotions and perceptions. I also had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and why I'd been so easily deceived. Looking back, there had been signs that things didn't add up, but I'd ignored them because I wanted to believe that I was part of this successful, glamorous friend group. I'd been so focused on feeling included and accepted that I hadn't paid attention to the inconsistencies in their stories. The most painful realization was that my friendships had been built on a foundation of lies, and that I'd never really known these people at all. The personalities they'd shown me were carefully crafted characters designed to impress and deceive. I had no idea who they really were underneath their fake personas, which meant I was essentially grieving the loss of people who had never actually existed. I made the decision to cut contact with all of them immediately, despite their desperate attempts to convince me otherwise. They tried every possible approach to maintain our relationships, from emotional manipulation to logical arguments to promises of complete honesty going forward. But I couldn't get past the betrayal and manipulation. They'd spent 5 years viewing me as someone to be deceived rather than a genuine friend to be trusted with the truth. Emma sent me a series of increasingly desperate emails over the following weeks, begging for forgiveness and explaining that she'd been planning to come clean for months. She said the stress of maintaining the lies had been overwhelming, and that she'd genuinely cared about me despite the deception. She offered to pay me back for any money I'd spent on gifts or activities based on her fake persona, and she promised to introduce me to her real life and authentic self. In her final email, Emma wrote a detailed account of how the deception had started and evolved, claiming that it had begun as a defense mechanism to cope with feelings of inadequacy and had spiraled out of control. She described the group dynamic that had made it impossible for any of them to come clean individually, since they were all complicit in maintaining each other's lies. Jake showed up at my apartment multiple times trying to apologize and explain his behavior. He brought a portfolio of his real photography work, amateur shots he'd taken as a hobby, and said he'd been too ashamed of his actual skill level to share it with the group. He claimed that his feelings for me as a friend had been real, even if everything else had been fake. During one of these visits, Jake broke down completely and admitted that he'd been struggling with severe depression and anxiety related to his fake lifestyle. He said that pretending to be successful had become an addiction that he couldn't stop, even when he wanted to. He begged me to help him figure out how to transition back to living authentically, claiming that our friendship was the only real thing in his life. Sophia sent me several text messages alternating between apologies and accusations, revealing the instability in her personality that I'd never seen before. In some messages, she acknowledged that what they'd done was wrong and expressed genuine remorse for the pain they'd caused me. In others, she blamed me for being too judgmental and said that everyone lies about their lives to some extent. Her most disturbing message came late one night when she was apparently drunk, accusing me of being jealous of their fake success and claiming that I'd been obsessed with their lifestyles in an unhealthy way. She said that my investigation of their lives proved I was possessive and controlling, and that they'd been justified in lying to me because I wouldn't have been able to handle the truth about their real situations. Marcus tried to maintain that we could rebuild our friendship on a foundation of honesty, approaching the situation like a business problem that could be solved with the right strategy. He offered to introduce me to his real friends and show me his actual living situation, promising that he would never lie to me again. He seemed to genuinely believe that we could move past the deception and start over with a clean slate. Marcus also sent me several long text messages analyzing the psychological and sociological factors that had led to their deception, treating the situation like an academic case study. He argued that their behavior was a rational response to societal pressure to appear successful, and that condemning them for adapting to unrealistic social expectations was unfair. Lily was the most hostile in her response to my decision to end the friendship, revealing a vindictive side of her personality that I'd never encountered before. She accused me of being self-righteous and said that I was overreacting to what she considered harmless role-playing. She claimed that I'd been judgmental about their real jobs and income levels, which justified their decision to lie to me. In her final communication, Lily actually threatened to expose embarrassing information about me that I'd shared with the group in confidence, claiming that if I was going to ruin their lives by telling people about their deception, she would make sure I faced consequences too. This threat confirmed that she hadn't learned anything from the experience and was still thinking in terms of manipulation and retaliation. The experience left me with significant trust issues and made me question my ability to judge people's character in fundamental ways. If I could be fooled so completely by people I saw regularly and considered my closest friends, how could I trust my instincts about anyone else? I became much more cautious about new relationships and found myself constantly looking for signs that people might be lying to me. I also had to deal with the practical consequences of losing my entire social circle at once. These people had been my primary source of social interaction for 5 years, and suddenly I was completely alone in a city where I didn't have many other connections. I had to rebuild my social life from scratch while processing the trauma of discovering that my closest relationships had been based on elaborate deceptions. The isolation was particularly difficult during holidays and special occasions when I would normally have spent time with the group. I found myself scrolling through old photos from our gatherings, trying to identify which moments had been genuine and which had been performance. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where most of the pieces were fake, and I could never be certain about which memories were real. I started therapy with Dr. Martinez about 6 weeks after cutting contact with the group, initially seeking help for what I thought were trust issues and depression. But as I described the situation to her, she helped me understand that what I'd experienced was actually a form of psychological manipulation and abuse that had specific terminology and treatment approaches. Dr. Martinez explained that I'd been the victim of what psychologists call gaslighting on a massive scale, where my perception of reality had been systematically distorted by people I trusted. She helped me understand that the shame I felt about being deceived wasn't warranted, and that my trusting nature wasn't a character flaw, even though it had made me vulnerable to their manipulation. Through therapy, I learned about the concept of trauma bonding, which explained why I'd felt so close to people who were actively deceiving me. The shared experiences and emotional intimacy I'd felt with the group had been real from my perspective, even though it had been manufactured from theirs. This helped me understand why the betrayal felt so devastating, and why I was having trouble processing the loss. Dr. Martinez also helped me understand that the phenomenon of people creating fake personas to gain social acceptance is more common than I'd realized, especially in environments where there's pressure to appear successful and accomplished. Social media has made it easier than ever for people to fabricate impressive lives, and the networking culture in major cities can create environments where people feel compelled to exaggerate or lie about their achievements. We worked together to identify the specific vulnerabilities in my personality and circumstances that had made me susceptible to their deception. My desire to be accepted and included, combined with my tendency to give people the benefit of the doubt, had created perfect conditions for their manipulation to succeed. Understanding these factors helped me develop strategies for protecting myself in future relationships. The experience has made me more empathetic toward people who struggle with feelings of inadequacy or imposter syndrome, but it's also made me much more aware of the importance of authenticity in relationships. I now value friends who are comfortable being vulnerable about their struggles and insecurities rather than people who seem to have perfect lives. Looking back, I can see that my fake friends were probably suffering from their own deep insecurities and feelings of inadequacy. Creating elaborate lies about their lives was likely their way of coping with shame about their real circumstances. While this doesn't excuse their behavior toward me, it helps me understand the psychological motivation behind their deception and prevents me from taking their betrayal entirely personally. I've slowly built new friendships based on honesty and authenticity, and while it took time to trust people again, I now have relationships that feel much more genuine and supportive. My current friends know about my struggles with work, relationships, and personal challenges, and I know about theirs. We support each other through real problems, rather than competing to appear more successful. The experience also motivated me to be more honest about my own life, and to stop comparing myself to others based on external appearances of success. I realized that I'd been just as focused on image and status as my fake friends were, which is part of what made me vulnerable to their deception. I was so eager to be part of what seemed like a successful, glamorous group that I didn't question whether their lives were too good to be true. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never discovered the truth about my friends' lies. Would they have eventually come clean, or would they have continued the deception indefinitely? Would the weight of maintaining such elaborate lies have eventually caused their relationships to implode anyway? Or would I have spent years or even decades living in their fabricated reality? I also think about whether there might have been a way to salvage the friendships if they'd been honest with me from the beginning about their real lives and struggles. If they'd told me they were working service jobs while trying to build careers, or that they were struggling financially but had big dreams, I would have been supportive and understanding. The lies themselves were more damaging to our relationship than the truth would have been. The whole experience taught me that genuine friendship requires vulnerability and authenticity, even when the truth isn't impressive or glamorous. The people who are worth having in your life are the ones who will accept and support you regardless of your job title, income, or social status. Anyone who requires you to be someone you're not in order to maintain their friendship isn't someone who genuinely cares about you as a person. I'm grateful that I discovered the truth about my fake friends, even though it was painful at the time. Living in a relationship built on lies would have continued to damage my sense of reality and self-worth. Now I have the opportunity to build genuine connections with people who value honesty and authenticity as much as I do. The experience has made me a more discerning person when it comes to relationships, but it hasn't made me cynical. I still believe that most people are fundamentally honest and that genuine friendships are possible. I've just learned to pay attention to consistency between people's words and actions, and to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right. If anyone reading this finds themselves in a similar situation, I want them to know that being deceived by people you trust isn't a reflection of your intelligence or worth as a person. Skilled manipulators can fool anyone, and having a trusting nature is actually a positive quality, even if it sometimes makes you vulnerable. The important thing is learning from the experience and using it to build better, more authentic relationships in the future. The most important lesson I learned is that real friendship isn't about impressing each other or competing for status. It's about accepting and supporting each other through both successes and struggles. True friends celebrate your authentic achievements and help you through your genuine challenges, rather than creating elaborate fantasies designed to make themselves feel better at your expense.